Look inside your pantry right now. A bag of chips, some protein bars, a jar of peanut butter, and maybe coffee that traveled halfway around the globe to reach your kitchen. None of that would count as food to your ancestors. So, what did they actually eat instead? The real answer would turn most modern stomachs. Researchers have pulled the evidence straight out of the ground on nearly every continent. Evidence that upends most of what people assume about our own history. To understand what actually ended up on the menu, you have to leave behind every assumption built into a modern grocery store and go back roughly 3 million years, long before there was such a thing as farming, cooking, or even a fixed camp to call home. The people alive then were not choosing meals off a menu. They were reading a landscape that could kill them just as easily as it could feed them, and every single calorie had to be earned, chased down, dug out of the ground, or fought over with animals that had far better teeth and claws than any human ever had. What they actually put in their mouths across that stretch of time looks almost nothing like anything currently sitting in your kitchen. And the deeper you go into the actual evidence, the stranger and more uncomfortable that ancient menu becomes. None of it was clean. None of it was convenient. Almost none of it would pass as edible by any modern standard. And yet every single meal on that list is the reason your body works the way it works today, right down to the specific cravings that hit you at 11 at night. To really understand it, we have to start at the very bottom of the food chain, because that is genuinely where this whole story begins. If digging into the uncomfortable, unfiltered version of human history is exactly why you are watching right now, subscribing means the next one lands in front of you the moment it is ready. Roughly 3 million years ago, your earliest ancestors were not hunters chasing anything down. They were scavengers, and not even the first ones in line. When a big cat took down a zebra or an antelope on the open grassland, the cat ate first, claiming the organs and the richest muscle. After the cat moved off, hyenas and other scavengers moved in, cracking through ribs, hide, and the smaller, softer bones. By the time an early human wandered up to what remained, the pickings were genuinely grim. Thick leg bones stripped almost completely clean, bones so dense that even a hyena's jaw could not crack them open. That leftover pile is exactly what your ancestors were eating. Their real prize, the thing worth fighting for, was the marrow hidden deep inside those thick bones. Early humans would approach a picked over carcass, select the heaviest leg bones, and smash them apart using sharp edged stone tools, known to archaeologists as Oldowan tools, some of the oldest deliberately shaped tools ever found. Inside was marrow, pale, greasy, and calorie dense, and they scooped it straight out with bare fingers and ate it uncooked. To modernize, that sounds miserable. To an ancestor running on scraps, it was the best meal available that day, because nothing else scavenging that same carcass had hands capable of gripping a rock hard enough to break that bone open. Skulls were treated the same way. A cracked open skull holds close to a full pound of dense, calorie-rich fat, and for a body constantly on the edge of starvation, that was close to winning a lottery. This is very likely why your own body still treats fat as something precious, hoarding it, craving it, building entire meals around it without you consciously choosing to. Researchers who study cut marks and impact fractures on these ancient bones under close magnification can actually distinguish the pattern left by a carnivore's teeth from the pattern left by a deliberate strike with a stone tool, which is how we know with real confidence that a human hand, not an animal jaw, was responsible for opening that particular bone. Insects filled in the rest of the diet. Termites, beetle grubs, fat white larvae roughly the size of a thumb, all of it got eaten regularly. Not as some desperate last resort, but as an ordinary, reliable part of daily eating. This was simply what an ordinary day looked like for well over 1 million years straight, generation after generation, with almost nothing changing. Then everything shifted, and it started with fire. The earliest confirmed evidence of controlled fire use comes from a site called Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, dated to roughly 1 million years old. Fire made cooking possible, and cooking functions almost like predigestion. Raw meat and raw plant fiber force the gut to grind through hours of hard chemical breakdown before any real nutrition gets absorbed. Cooked food arrives already partly broken down, which means the body spends noticeably less energy digesting it and pulls out considerably more usable calories from the exact same bite. Researchers believe that as cooking became routine, the human gut gradually shrank in size, since it no longer needed to be so large and metabolically expensive. All of that freed up energy appears to have been redirected somewhere very specific into a rapidly growing brain. The brain makes up only about 2% of total body weight, yet it consumes roughly 20% of the body's total daily calories. You simply cannot power an organ that demanding on raw leaves and the occasional handful of grubs. You need dense, cooked, fat-rich food to fund it. In a very real sense, cooking financed the modern human brain, and that brain then went on to build essentially everything else that followed. Archaeologists studying hearths from this general period also find scattered animal bones showing distinct scorch patterns consistent with roasting rather than accidental burning, along with charred plant remains suggesting roots and tubers were being deliberately buried in hot ash to soften them, a technique that requires planning ahead rather than simply reacting to hunger in the moment. By roughly 300,000 years ago, humans looked recognizably similar to people alive today, and the diet had expanded dramatically. Mammoth, bison, wild horses, and various deer species on open ground. Fish and shellfish pulled from rivers, lakes, and coastlines. Wild grains, roots, berries, nuts, and mushrooms gathered from the surrounding landscape. Eggs raided directly from nests, and honey, especially honey. The Hadza people of Tanzania still live a hunting and gathering lifestyle close to how humans lived before farming existed anywhere, and roughly 15% of their total caloric intake comes directly from wild honey. They will climb genuinely dangerous trees, absorb dozens of stings in the process, and go right back for more, because almost nothing else available in that environment packs as many usable calories into a single mouthful. And here is the strange part. That exact same pull towards something intensely sweet is still fully alive inside you today. Your brain is wired for it, because for hundreds of thousands of years, sugar delivered two things simultaneously: an immediate burst of usable energy and extra fuel your body could quietly store away as fat for leaner days ahead. That stored fat was frequently the only thing standing between an ancestor and starvation once food became scarce again. A dripping wild honeycomb was likely the richest single meal most ancestors ever encountered in an entire lifetime. That is the exact program still quietly running inside you right now. Your body genuinely cannot tell the difference between honey dripping from a wild hive and a glazed pastry from a bakery case. Modern food manufacturing simply took that ancient signal and industrialized it. Soda, candy, breakfast cereal, flavored sauces, even most commercial bread. Nearly every shelf-stable packaged product on Earth is some version of sugar wearing a different costume, which goes a long way toward explaining why walking away from it feels so genuinely difficult, and why a bag of candy left open on a counter tends to disappear faster than almost anything else in the house. Your body still believes it is preparing for a famine that, for you, will likely never actually arrive. Sugar was never the only craving your body picked up along the way. There is also meat, and specifically the pull toward a single large, efficient kill. One mammoth carcass could realistically feed an entire group for weeks at a stretch. A single, successful large hunt saved hundreds of hours that would otherwise have gone towards slowly gathering berries and digging up roots, one handful at a time. That saved time became something genuinely new in evolutionary history: spare time. And that spare time went directly into raising children more carefully, teaching skills deliberately, refining tools, and telling stories around a shared fire. This is very likely why your body still registers a strong pull toward protein specifically. Every craving currently running inside you was originally shaped by whatever kept your ancestors alive long enough to reproduce successfully, which is also very likely why a meal built around a large cut of meat still tends to feel more satisfying and more complete to most people than an equivalent number of calories eaten as small snacks scattered across the day. Modern science has found ways to check all of this directly, rather than simply guessing from bones and stone tools alone. Researchers studying fossilized human waste, technically called coprolites, have been able to identify actual plant fragments, seeds, and even parasite eggs preserved inside them, giving scientists a direct, unfiltered look at exactly what specific ancient individuals had eaten in the days immediately before that particular sample was produced. Separately, researchers analyzing the chemical signatures locked inside ancient tooth enamel and bone collagen, specifically the ratio of certain carbon and nitrogen isotopes absorbed from food can now estimate with real precision roughly how much of a given individual's diet came from meat versus plants, and even distinguish land animals from marine sources. That same isotope technique has produced a genuinely striking result when applied to Neanderthals. Their bone chemistry consistently points to a diet built overwhelmingly around large game meat, in some populations rivaling the meat-heavy diet of a modern wolf pack, considerably more carnivorous on average than the more varied plant-inclusive diet typical of the Homo sapiens populations living alongside them at the same time. That single chemical signature, preserved quietly inside fossilized bone for over 100,000 years, tells researchers more about daily Neanderthal life than an entire room full of stone tools ever could, since it reflects an actual accumulated record of what was eaten meal after meal, rather than a single isolated snapshot. But there was one specific craving your ancestors had that people today still have real trouble discussing honestly, and that craving was directed at each other. At a cave site in Western England, researchers recovered human bones dated to roughly 14,700 years ago, and those bones told a story almost nobody wanted to read. The skulls had been meticulously cleaned using stone tools, with the face and the base of each skull carefully removed, leaving behind the upper portion reshaped, rim by rim, into something resembling a drinking cup. The long bones had been cracked open using exactly the same technique your much earlier ancestors once used to reach antelope marrow. And here is where the story turns genuinely disturbing. This was not a case of desperate starvation. That same cave contained the remains of horses, deer, and other perfectly edible animals in real abundance. A study calculating the raw caloric value of a human body put the number at somewhere around 125,000 calories total. A single bison carries roughly 600,000. A mammoth carries somewhere around 3 million. In pure caloric terms, humans were an inefficient food source, which means this almost certainly was not about hunger at all. It was a choice. One forearm bone recovered from that same site had been carved with a deliberate zigzag pattern after every scrap of meat had already been removed, work that makes far more sense as ritual than as practical butchery. And that site is not an isolated case either. Similar remains, showing the same deliberate processing, have turned up at other locations across Germany, France, Spain, and Croatia, separated from one another by thousands of years and considerable distance, yet showing a strikingly consistent pattern of careful, methodical bone treatment rather than the chaotic damage you would expect from a purely desperate, panicked act. Across long stretches of time and wide distances, in different corners of the world entirely, humans were doing this to other humans, and not consistently, because circumstances demanded it. At some point, in some places, it appears to have meant something else entirely, possibly tied to conflict between rival groups, possibly tied to funerary practice, possibly tied to belief systems no written record ever survived to explain, and researchers studying these sites are genuinely still divided on which explanation or which combination of explanations actually fits the evidence best. And it gets stranger still, because your ancestors did not only eat fresh meat, they also deliberately ate meat that had been left to rot. After a successful hunt, far more meat existed than any single group could realistically consume before it spoiled, so surplus meat was sometimes buried, tucked into cool caves, or submerged in cold streams for days, weeks, or occasionally months at a stretch. By the time anyone returned to retrieve it, that meat was often crawling with insect activity and carried a heavy smell of active decay. People ate it anyway, and some researchers suspect certain groups may have genuinely preferred it prepared that way. Partially decomposed meat has already been broken down considerably by bacterial activity, which makes it noticeably easier to chew and digest, and that same bacterial activity generates useful B vitamins your body actively needs. Your own body still carries a clear memory of that ancient habit. Every fermented food you currently enjoy is really just controlled, deliberately managed rot. Cheese, yogurt, sourdough bread, beer, wine, soy sauce, pickled vegetables, all of it is decomposition, carefully slowed down and made reliably safe to eat. Your taste for a good aged cheese did not begin in some pristine European dairy. It began on an open savanna roughly 100,000 years ago, built on something considerably less appetizing than cheese ever will be. Even honey was sometimes intentionally allowed to age and ferment slightly before eating, since a small amount of natural fermentation could stretch a rare, prized food source across several additional days without it becoming genuinely dangerous to consume. Every single craving you carry today for fat, for salt, for sugar, for whatever tastes richest and most intense in the moment, is still quietly operating inside you right now, running exactly the way it always has. Your body has no functional concept of a grocery store, a refrigerator, or a delivery app. It only knows one basic instruction: eat what is rich, eat what is rare, eat while food is actually available, because there is a very real chance tomorrow will bring nothing at all. Late at night, when you open the refrigerator, even though you are not genuinely hungry, you are running a program that is roughly 3 million years old, still quietly scanning for calories, still trying to keep you alive in a world that no longer resembles the one that built it. If you took an average modern adult and dropped them into the world of 50,000 years ago with nothing, they would very likely be dead within days. They would have no idea how to reliably find clean water. Most of the surrounding plants would be a complete mystery, and they would lack both the physical conditioning and the practical knowledge needed to run down an animal, climb a tree safely for wild honey, or crack open a heavy leg bone for marrow. They would starve while standing in the middle of a landscape genuinely full of usable food they simply could not recognize. But reverse the experiment and drop someone from 50,000 years ago straight into a modern kitchen, and they would likely assume they had stumbled directly into paradise. They would not understand any of it. A cold, intensely sweet drink sealed inside a metal container. Bread that somebody else had already baked for them. Milk that stayed fresh and sealed for weeks at a stretch. Fruit shipped in from places they could never have imagined existed. Food that required no chasing whatsoever. It would look, to them, like the richest place any human being had ever set foot inside. For roughly 3 million years, essentially every human who ever lived spent much of their life hungry, cold, and exhausted. You might genuinely be among the first generation in that entire span for whom that is no longer automatically true, standing at the very end of 3 million years of scavenged marrow, cracked skulls, roasted roots, buried meat, and honeycombs rated at real physical risk, all of it quietly compressed into the specific cravings you still feel every single day without ever fully understanding where they actually came from. And it is worth sitting with just how rare that actually is.